Have you ever had a question so unexpected that it silenced an entire room? Not because it was loud, not because it was controversial, but because it touched something deeper than politics, ideology, or public opinion. In March of 2026, during a conference in Johannesburg focused on peace, community development, and religious values, hundreds of conversations were taking place across crowded halls and meeting rooms. More than 1,500 delegates had gathered from churches, educational institutions, charities, and community organizations across Africa and beyond. Among the most anticipated guests was Joel Osteen, the American pastor known around the world for messages of hope, faith, and personal encouragement. Also attending the event was Julius Malema, one of the most recognizable and debated political figures in Africa. For years, Malema had spoken passionately about poverty, inequality, unemployment, and the future of African communities. On the surface, these two men appeared to come from completely different worlds. One spent decades preaching from church platforms. The other became famous through political rallies and fierce debates about social justice. Many people knew their names. Few imagined they would ever sit together in a private conversation. Yet, after the main conference sessions ended, a coordinator suggested an informal meeting between the two men inside a small prayer room located behind the main conference hall. The discussion was supposed to last only 15 minutes. No cameras, no speeches, no audience, just a quiet conversation. But what happened inside that room would soon become the most talked about moment of the entire event. Those present expected polite introductions and friendly discussion. Instead, they witnessed an honest exchange about Jesus, suffering, faith, poverty, and the struggles facing humanity. And it all began with a single question from Julius Malema. A question so direct that every person in the room suddenly stopped moving and listened. The conference had already been filled with important discussions. Leaders from churches, schools, charities, and community organizations spent the day sharing ideas about poverty reduction, youth development, education, and social responsibility. Johannesburg provided an appropriate setting for such conversations. As one of Africa's largest cities, it represented both extraordinary opportunity and difficult challenges. Modern business districts stood only a short distance from communities still struggling with unemployment and economic hardship. Throughout the day, Joel Osteen participated in several sessions focused on faith, personal resilience, and community outreach. Delegates gathered around him wherever he went, eager to hear his perspective on hope and spiritual encouragement. Julius Malema attended a different set of discussions. His focus was on the role faith-based organizations could play in reducing poverty and supporting vulnerable communities throughout Africa. Although both men moved through the same conference halls, their schedules rarely crossed. Many attendees noticed the coincidence. Some quietly wondered what a conversation between them might sound like. Late in the afternoon, after the final scheduled session ended, a conference coordinator approached both men with a simple suggestion. Would they be willing to meet privately? The idea seemed harmless. Neither man objected. A small prayer room behind the main conference center was made available. The gathering was informal. Only a handful of organizers, pastors, and community leaders were invited to observe. No media representatives were present. No official statements were planned. The meeting was expected to last only 15 minutes before both men continued with other commitments. As participants entered the room, the atmosphere remained relaxed. People greeted one another warmly. Coffee cups sat on a small table near the wall. Several chairs were arranged in a circle. There was no stage, no microphones, no audience. For a few moments, it felt less like a public event and more like a conversation among friends. Yet everyone understood that the meeting itself was unusual. Joel Osteen had become known around the world through decades of ministry. His message is often centered on encouragement, faith, forgiveness, and hope. Millions of people had watched his sermons, read his books, or listened to his interviews. Julius Malema came from a very different background. His public reputation had been built through political activism, passionate speeches, and debates about economic inequality. Supporters viewed him as a strong advocate for the poor. Critics often challenged his methods and rhetoric. Despite their differences, both men shared something important. They regularly spoke about people who felt forgotten. They both addressed audiences searching for answers, and they both understood that hope matters. As the participants settled into their seats, the conversation began politely. No one expected that this brief meeting would become the defining memory of the entire conference. But sometimes the most important conversations happen when there's no script. Sometimes the moments people remember most are the ones that were never scheduled. And in that small prayer room, two men from very different worlds were about to begin a discussion neither of them would soon forget. The central lesson from this moment was simple. Meaningful dialogue often begins when people who disagree are willing to sit down and listen. The conversation began quietly. There were no dramatic introductions, no attempts to impress one another, no effort to win an argument. Instead, the discussion started with stories. Joel Osteen spoke first. He described his years in ministry and the many communities his organization had worked with through outreach programs, disaster relief efforts, and support initiatives for families facing difficult circumstances. He talked about meeting people who had lost homes, jobs, and loved ones. Again and again, he said he witnessed individuals finding strength through faith even when their circumstances seemed overwhelming. Those listening could see that he spoke from experience. For Joel Osteen, hope was not merely an idea. It was something he believed could help people endure life's hardest moments. When he finished, Julius Malema leaned forward slightly. Then he began sharing his own experiences. His stories came from a different world. He spoke about traveling through rural communities and urban neighborhoods across South Africa. He described families struggling to find stable employment. He talked about young people leaving school with dreams, but finding few opportunities waiting for them. He spoke about communities where poverty remained a daily reality. Several people in the room listened carefully. These were not statistics on a report. These were people Malema had met face to face, young men searching for work, young women trying to support their families, parents worrying about their children's future. As the discussion continued, the subject naturally turned toward youth unemployment. It was a topic that concerned both men. South Africa continued to face significant challenges in providing opportunities for its younger generation. Many young people felt uncertain about what tomorrow might bring. Some had begun losing confidence in institutions. Others felt disconnected from society altogether. Malema spoke openly about this reality. He explained that hopelessness could become one of the most dangerous problems any society faces. When young people stop believing their future can improve, he said something important begins to disappear. The room grew quieter. Several attendees nodded. They had seen the same challenges in their own communities. Joel Osteen listened carefully before responding. He agreed that hope was essential. Without hope, people often stop trying. Without hope, they can become trapped by fear, frustration, and disappointment. But he added something else. Hope alone was not enough. People also needed opportunities. They needed support. They needed education. They needed practical solutions that allowed them to move forward. The statement caught Malema's attention. It was perhaps not the answer some expected from a pastor. Yet it reflected a balance between spiritual encouragement and practical action. For the first time, the two men appeared to find common ground. neither denied the importance of faith, neither ignored the realities of poverty. Both recognized that human beings need more than promises. They need reasons to believe change is possible. The discussion became more thoughtful. The initial differences that many expected to dominate the conversation began to fade. Instead of debating political positions or theological doctrines, they focused on people, real people, families, communities, young men and women searching for purpose. The participants in the room began to realize something important. Despite their very different backgrounds, both men were asking similar questions. How do we restore hope? How do we help people believe in tomorrow? How do we create conditions where faith and opportunity can work together? The conversation was becoming deeper with each passing minute. And soon it would move from questions about society to questions about something even more personal, faith itself. The key lesson from this part of the discussion was clear. Hope becomes most powerful when it is joined by meaningful action and genuine concern for others. By this point, the meeting had already lasted longer than anyone expected. The original 15-minute schedule had quietly disappeared. No one seemed eager to leave. The discussion had become thoughtful, respectful, and surprisingly personal. The small prayer room felt different now. The casual atmosphere of the beginning had given way to focused attention. Everyone present sensed that something meaningful was unfolding. Joel Osteen and Julius Malema had spent nearly an hour discussing hope, poverty, young people, and the challenges facing communities across Africa and beyond. Then came a pause, not an uncomfortable pause, just a moment of silence as both men reflected on what had been said. Julius Malema sat back in his chair. For a few seconds, he looked toward the floor. Then he looked directly at Joel Osteen. The room became still. Several attendees later recalled sensing that the conversation was about to change direction. And it did. In a calm voice, Malema asked a question that nobody in the room expected. Do you truly believe that Jesus existed as a real person in history? The question hung in the air. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the sounds from the hallway outside seemed distant. The silence was immediate and complete. Some people exchanged brief glances. Others simply stared at the two men. The question was not hostile. It was not asked with sarcasm or anger. Yet it was remarkably direct. Many people had expected discussions about poverty, politics, or community development. Instead, the conversation had suddenly shifted to one of the most fundamental questions in Christianity. For a moment, Joel Osteen did not answer. He remained quiet. Not because he was uncomfortable, not because he lacked a response, but because he appeared to be carefully considering how to answer. The room watched. Seconds passed. In many public debates, people rush to speak. They compete to deliver quick answers. This felt different. Joel Osteen seemed determined to respond thoughtfully rather than immediately. The brief silence itself became meaningful. It communicated respect for the seriousness of the question. Malema remained focused. His expression revealed genuine curiosity. He was not performing for an audience. There were no cameras recording the exchange, no reporters waiting outside. This was simply one man asking another what he truly believed. And perhaps that was why the moment felt so powerful. In a world filled with prepared statements and carefully managed interviews, this question appeared completely authentic. Several people in the room later said they realized something important at that moment. Questions about faith often matter most when they are asked honestly, not to embarrass someone, not to win an argument, but to understand. The atmosphere became almost reflective. The discussion was no longer centered on social issues alone. Now it had moved into deeper territory. Questions about history, questions about belief, questions that people across generations have wrestled with for centuries. Joel Osteen finally lifted his head slightly. He appeared calm, thoughtful, ready to respond. And everyone in the room leaned in to listen because they knew the next few minutes could define the entire conversation. The lesson from this moment was simple but powerful. Sometimes the most important conversations begin with a question that many people are afraid to ask. For a few moments after the question was asked, the room remained completely silent. Joel Osteen looked around briefly before returning his attention to Julius Malema. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured. He did not rush. He did not attempt to deliver a dramatic answer. Instead, he began by acknowledging the importance of the question itself. He explained that throughout history, countless people had asked the same thing. Not only believers, scholars had asked it, historians had examined it, writers, philosophers, and ordinary people had wrestled with it for generations. Then he addressed the question directly. Yes, he said, he believed Jesus existed as a real historical person, but he did not stop there. Joel Osteen explained that references to Jesus are not found only in the Bible. He noted that several ancient historical sources mention Jesus and the early Christian movement. While historians may debate details, the existence of Jesus as a historical figure has long been discussed and examined by scholars around the world. The room listened attentively. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged him. Joel Osteen continued. He explained that for billions of Christians across different nations and cultures, faith begins with the life of Jesus. His teachings, his example, his influence on human history. But then he introduced a second idea, and this seemed particularly important to him. Historical evidence, he said, can help people understand the past. It can provide context. It can answer certain questions. Yet faith involves something more. Faith becomes personal. It enters the experiences of individuals. It appears in moments of forgiveness, moments of healing, moments of hope, moments when people discover strength they did not know they possessed. Joel Osteen shared examples from people he had met over the years, individuals who had endured loss, families who had survived tragedy, people who felt broken but eventually found purpose again. He was careful not to claim that faith removed every difficulty. Instead, he suggested that faith often helps people face those difficulties with courage. Julius Malema listened without interruption. His attention never seemed to wander. The directness of his earlier question was now matched by the seriousness with which he listened. Others in the room noticed this. The conversation was not becoming a debate. It was becoming an exchange, an honest effort to understand another person's perspective. Joel Osteen paused briefly before continuing. He said that one reason faith remains important for so many people is that human beings naturally search for meaning. They search for purpose. They search for hope during difficult times. For many Christians, he explained, Jesus represents more than a historical figure. Jesus represents a source of guidance, compassion, forgiveness, and hope. The room remained quiet, not because people were shocked, but because they were engaged. Everyone seemed to understand that the conversation had moved beyond simple answers. It was touching questions that many people carry privately throughout their lives. Questions about belief, questions about truth, questions about what gives life meaning. When Joel Osteen finished speaking, there was another brief silence. Not the tense silence that followed Malema's question. This one felt different, reflective, thoughtful, as if everyone present was considering what had just been said. Then Malema nodded slowly. He appeared to appreciate the answer, yet those who knew him well could see that he was not finished. Another question was forming, and judging by the look on his face, it might be even more difficult than the first. The lesson from this exchange was clear. Historical facts may start a conversation about faith, but personal experience often shapes how people understand it. The atmosphere inside the prayer room had changed. What began as a brief private meeting had become a serious conversation about some of the deepest questions people asked throughout their lives. No one seemed concerned about the time anymore. The discussion had captured everyone's attention. Joel Osteen had just explained why he believed Jesus was both a historical figure and a source of personal faith for billions of people around the world. Many might have expected the conversation to end there. Instead, Julius Malema leaned forward once again. His expression remained thoughtful. He was not searching for an argument. He appeared to be searching for understanding. And then he asked a second question, a question that many people have asked throughout history. If God loves people, why do wars continue? The room immediately grew quiet again. This question felt different. The first had focused on history and belief. This one focused on suffering, real suffering, the kind that fills headlines and breaks families apart. Malema continued speaking. He mentioned conflicts taking place in different parts of the world. He spoke about children losing parents, parents losing children, communities destroyed by violence, families forced to leave their homes, people living with fear, hunger, and uncertainty. His words reflected concerns he had carried for years while speaking about poverty, injustice, and human suffering. Several people in the room lowered their eyes as he spoke. The topic touched something deeply personal. Almost everyone knew someone whose life had been affected by conflict, violence, or hardship. Others had witnessed such struggles firsthand. For a moment, nobody spoke. The question itself seemed larger than the room, larger than any individual, larger than politics, larger than religion. It was one of humanity's oldest questions. If there is love, why is there suffering? If there is goodness, why is there evil? If there is hope, why do so many people still experience pain? Joel Osteen listened carefully. He did not immediately offer a simple answer, perhaps because he understood that simple answers rarely satisfy questions like these. After a brief pause, he began speaking slowly. He explained that he did not believe God created war. He did not believe God desired violence. Instead, he said that human beings had been given the ability to make choices, and those choices carry consequences. According to Joel Osteen, many of history's greatest tragedies emerged from human decisions. Greed, hatred, pride, the desire for power, the refusal to forgive. Again and again, these forces had pushed people toward conflict. He emphasized that God may offer guidance toward peace, but human beings still decide whether to follow that path. The room listened carefully. Some nodded. Others remained deep in thought. Joel Osteen then shared stories he had encountered over the years. Stories of people who maintained faith despite losing loved ones, people who continued helping others despite experiencing hardship themselves, people who chose forgiveness when revenge might have seemed easier. For him, these stories represented evidence that hope could survive even in difficult circumstances. Yet, as thoughtful as the answer was, Julius Malema was not entirely satisfied. He respected the explanation, but he also saw another side of the issue. And he said so openly. He explained that for many poor families, philosophical answers often feel distant. When a parent cannot feed a child, discussions about free will may not seem enough. When unemployment continues year after year, people often need more than explanations. They need change. They need opportunity. They need practical help. The room became even more attentive. This was not a disagreement born from hostility. It was a genuine attempt to confront reality. Joel Osteen recognized that immediately. Rather than becoming defensive, he listened. The conversation was becoming deeper than anyone had expected. Both men appeared committed to honesty. Neither was trying to dominate the discussion. Neither was trying to score points. Instead, they were exploring one of humanity's most difficult questions from different perspectives. One speaking primarily from faith, the other speaking from experiences among communities facing daily hardship. And somewhere between those perspectives, a deeper understanding was beginning to emerge. The lesson from this part of the conversation was profound. Questions about suffering rarely have easy answers, but honest dialogue can help people move closer to understanding one another. By now, nearly an hour had passed. The conversation had traveled far beyond its original purpose. What started as a brief meeting between two well-known public figures had become a thoughtful exploration of faith, suffering, hope, and responsibility. No one in the room seemed eager to leave. The discussion had become too meaningful. After listening to Joel Osteen's explanation about human choice and suffering, Julius Malema became quiet for a moment. Then he shared a story. It was not a story about politics. It was not about elections, speeches, or public debates. It was about a family he had encountered during a visit to a rural community in South Africa. Malema described a small home in an area struggling with unemployment and limited opportunities. The family had experienced years of hardship. The father had lost his job. The mother worked occasionally when work could be found. Food was often scarce. Some days were better than others. Many days were not. Yet, despite their circumstances, something about the family had remained with him. Every evening, according to Malema, they gathered together to pray, not because their lives were easy, not because all their problems had disappeared, but because they believed prayer gave them strength to face another day. The room listened carefully. The story was simple, yet it carried emotional weight. Many people could picture similar families in communities around the world. Families doing their best while facing challenges beyond their control. Malema paused. Then he asked another question. This time, his voice was softer. But the question carried tremendous force. Can faith truly change a person's life if there's no practical action alongside it? The room fell silent once more. Several attendees later said this was the moment that surprised Joel Osteen the most, not because the question was confrontational, but because of its depth. The question reached beyond theology, beyond politics, beyond philosophy. It addressed a reality visible across many parts of the world. What happens when people possess faith but continue living under crushing hardship? What role should communities play? What responsibility do institutions have? Can prayer and action be separated? Joel Osteen remained thoughtful. For several seconds, he appeared to reflect carefully before answering. Then he did something that surprised some people in the room. He agreed with part of Malema's concern. He acknowledged that faith alone should not become an excuse for inaction. Churches, ministries, charities, community organizations, and leaders all have responsibilities. Helping people requires more than words. It requires service. It requires commitment. It requires tangible efforts that improve lives. Joel Osteen explained that faith should inspire action rather than replace it. According to him, faith can motivate people to feed the hungry, support families, educate children, and help communities recover from hardship. In that sense, belief and action should work together. One gives purpose. The other produces visible results. The answer seemed to resonate with many people present. Several attendees nodded. Others quietly reflected on their own organizations and communities. Malema listened carefully. He did not interrupt. When Joel Osteen finished speaking, there was a sense of mutual respect in the room. Neither man had abandoned his perspective, yet both appeared willing to recognize truth in what the other was saying. It was becoming increasingly clear that the discussion was not about proving who was right. It was about understanding how faith and responsibility intersect in the real world. For many observers, this became one of the most memorable moments of the entire conversation, not because anyone won an argument, but because two people from very different backgrounds found common ground. They agreed that hope matters. They agreed that faith matters. And they agreed that people suffering from poverty, unemployment, and hardship deserve more than sympathy. They deserve action. The lesson from this moment was powerful. Faith can inspire hope, but hope becomes most meaningful when it is accompanied by compassionate action. The conversation had now lasted far longer than anyone originally planned. What was supposed to be a brief 15-minute meeting had become an hour of honest dialogue. Questions had been asked, ideas had been challenged, experiences had been shared. Yet something remarkable had happened along the way. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The differences that seemed so significant at the beginning no longer dominated the discussion. Political labels had faded into the background. Public reputations seemed less important. The focus had shifted towards something more human. The struggles people face, the hope they seek, and the responsibility all people share toward one another. As the discussion slowly drew to a close, a local pastor who had been quietly observing spoke for the first time in several minutes. His suggestion was simple. Before everyone left, would they be willing to pray together? Nobody objected. In fact, the proposal seemed to arrive naturally. After everything that had been discussed, prayer felt like an appropriate conclusion. People began rising from their chairs. The small group moved closer together. Some formed a circle. Others stood shoulder to shoulder. The room itself remained modest. There were no bright lights, no cameras, no audience waiting for a statement. Just a handful of people standing together in a quiet prayer room in Johannesburg. One by one, hands reached across the circle. Soon everyone was connected. For a moment, there were no titles, no pastor, no politician, no organizer, no special guest. Only people. People concerned about the world around them. People hoping for something better. The pastor began to pray. His words were simple. He prayed for peace in places affected by conflict. He prayed for families struggling with poverty. He prayed for young people searching for opportunity and direction. He prayed for communities burdened by violence and uncertainty. He prayed for wisdom for leaders. He prayed for healing where division existed. As the prayer continued, the room became completely still. Some closed their eyes. Others bowed their heads. The arguments and questions from earlier seemed distant now, not forgotten, but placed within a larger perspective. The prayer was not about winning debates. It was about people. People who needed hope. People who needed help. People whose lives were shaped by circumstances often beyond their control. Several participants later recalled that this became the emotional center of the entire meeting. Not the difficult questions, not the thoughtful answers, but the moment when everyone stopped talking and simply reflected together. For a brief time, the differences between them seemed smaller than the challenges facing the world. The suffering of families affected by war, the struggles of young people without opportunities, the realities of hunger, unemployment, and uncertainty. These concerns crossed political boundaries. They crossed religious traditions. They crossed national borders. And standing together in that prayer room, everyone appeared to recognize that truth. When the prayer finally ended, nobody spoke immediately. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier silences. This one carried a sense of peace, a sense of reflection, a sense that something meaningful had taken place. Not because every question had been answered, But because people had listened to one another, the lesson from this moment was unforgettable. Sometimes the most powerful form of unity is not agreement on every issue, but a shared desire for peace, compassion, and hope. As the prayer concluded, the atmosphere inside the room felt noticeably different from when the meeting had begun. The tension that often accompanies difficult discussions was gone. The need to defend positions had faded. What remained was a quiet sense of mutual respect. People slowly released each other's hands and returned to their seats. No one seemed in a hurry to leave. The conversation had touched something deeper than anyone expected. For nearly an hour, questions about Jesus, faith, poverty, suffering, responsibility, and hope had filled the room. Not every issue had been resolved. Not every question had received a perfect answer. Yet something important had happened. People had listened, truly listened. Before leaving, Julius Malema stood for a moment near the doorway. Several participants looked toward him, sensing he wanted to say something. The room grew quiet one final time. Malema looked around at those gathered. Then he spoke. His words were calm, simple, and sincere. I still have many questions about faith, he said. The statement immediately captured everyone's attention. Perhaps because it was honest. He did not claim certainty. He did not pretend to have all the answers. Instead, he acknowledged what many people quietly experience throughout their lives. Question, doubts, curiosity, the desire to understand more. Then he continued. But today I understand that many people are searching for hope. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The words were not dramatic, yet they carried weight. Throughout the discussion, hope had appeared again and again. Hope for young people, hope for struggling families, hope for communities facing hardship, hope for a more peaceful world. In that brief statement, Malema seemed to recognize something that connected many of the issues discussed that afternoon. People are searching not only for jobs, not only for security, not only for opportunity, but also for meaning, for purpose, for reasons to believe tomorrow can be better than today. Joel Osteen listened carefully, then he responded with a smile. His reply was equally simple. Sometimes the biggest questions are the beginning of a faith journey. The room became quiet once more. Several people later remembered that sentence more than anything else from the meeting, not because it answered every question, but because it acknowledged something universal. Many people begin their journey not with certainty, but with questions. Questions about life, questions about suffering, questions about God, questions about hope. And sometimes those questions become the first step toward deeper understanding. A few minutes later, the meeting finally ended. People exchanged handshakes. Some continued quiet conversations in small groups. Others simply reflected on what they had witnessed. As Julius Malema and Joel Osteen left the prayer room, there was no official announcement, no press conference, no dramatic conclusion. Yet those who had been present understood that they had witnessed something rare. Two men from completely different worlds had sat together and discussed some of humanity's most important questions. They had spoken honestly. They had listened respectfully. They had challenged one another without hostility. And they had ended not with division, but with understanding. The most memorable part of the meeting was not a particular answer. It was the willingness to engage in genuine dialogue. In a world where disagreements often create distance, this conversation demonstrated another possibility. People can disagree and still listen. They can ask difficult questions and still show respect. They can come from different backgrounds and still search for common ground. The story of that afternoon in Johannesburg is not really about politics, and it is not only about religion. At its heart, it is a story about people searching for answers, people trying to understand suffering, people looking for hope in a complicated world. Whether they live in Africa, America, or anywhere else, human beings share many of the same desires. They seek dignity, they seek justice, they seek truth, and they seek hope. No nation can become truly strong while large numbers of its people remain trapped in poverty, hopelessness, or injustice. Economic progress matters. Social progress matters. But lasting change begins in something even deeper. It begins in the human conscience. It begins when people choose compassion over indifference, understanding over hostility, and truth over convenience. The conversation between Julius Malema and Joel Osteen did not solve the world's problems. No single conversation could. But it offered a reminder that meaningful change often starts when people are willing to listen to one another. A better future requires more than good intentions. It requires unity, kindness, responsibility, and a commitment to truth. And perhaps most importantly, it requires hope. Because hope belongs to those who are willing to act, to serve, and to help build a better tomorrow. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of the conversation stood out to you most? Do you believe difficult questions can strengthen faith rather than weaken it? Join the discussion, share your perspective, and continue spreading hope wherever you are.